Hi, everybody. Let's talk about MG 201, Week 4, Chapter 4, which is Global Management. Basically, how to manage across borders, how to deal with expanding companies that wind up going to other countries and other cultures. It's kind of fascinating. So, if you have never had the chance to do any kind of travel, I highly suggest it. It does open your mind, open your eyes to different practices in the world, and I think it's a good thing to do. I think there's a lot of rich enrichment that can come out of that. The book opens up with the concept of globalization. So when you think about it, in many ways, because of various methods of travel and communication and media, the world has gotten a lot smaller. So that audiences that you wouldn't have been able to get to easily, even a few years ago, have now become very easily to obtain access, and with the increased capacities towards shipping and the getting goods to consumers, there's a lot more of a global marketplace to consider within in a business that wants to seek expansion in that way. So you think about the whole global village concept. It's it's fierce. The competition comes out of nowhere. I mean, even in the U.S., you think about disruptors that have occurred within the last decade for various industries. So you have your hotels being rocked by your Airbnb concept, your local transportation, taxis and the like being shook to their core with Uber and Lyft and other ride providers. The whole sharing economy has been very different in terms of how businesses have to think about who's going to enter their space. And then you add to that the concept of, globally, who might have an idea that's going to play into your company's competition. So, it just keeps on going, and you have to kind of think about that. So I'm just going to go through this chapter and talk a little bit about some of the things that to consider within the framework of global management issues. One of the things, of course, is the usage of e-commerce and what that does to the global. You can order things from anywhere in the world if you're willing to just wait for them to be delivered. You can get things. My husband ordered something a little while ago, and I said, "You gonna get that soon?" He's like, "It's truly on a slow boat from China," and that used to be an just an expression that people would say that took a long time for something to get there. But in fact, this was being delivered from China, so it really was on a boat from China. It took about a month to get here. Kind of interesting. So, like I said, the whole things of the global marketplace, the negative and the positive effects that go along with that. So you do have a lot of good that comes out of it. I mean, you do have the increased, source of information, source of products, so that comes out of the global economy. And then the negatives comes out of it are, sometimes you have exploited labor forces. You might have different laws for product safety, for product standards when you get outside of the company. So, you play all the good and the bad, and we get to some interesting situations with changing administrations politically and their different ideas about what may or may not be a good thing to do in terms of global practices. So you have some of the, organizations and trade folks that are getting together and trying to come up with new ways to strengthen some economies and harm others, and it just gets to be a little bit of an issue. Alrighty, let me just see where here. You can read that section yourself there. I'm looking at. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about types of organizations and about international management. So you have your multinational corporations, your multinational organizations, your you have to be able to deal with your foreign customers, your foreign partners. With that comes a whole lot of information about what you have to know about somebody else's culture, their religion, who you're dealing with becomes very, very important. If you're dealing in an economy that does not allow, let's say, women to do certain things, you have to know these things. You can choose to, excuse me, go with the flow, fight it, or whatever the case may be, but you have to know what you're walking into. There's some religions that don't allow the concept of mortgage, the concept of health insurance. All of these play out for things that you have to know before you enter their space with regards to dealing with foreign countries, the suppliers, and what they bring to the table. They might have, like I said, different standards, different relationships, different deals that they have to work with, and you have to try to figure that out. It's just fascinating. There's a little bit of talk here about being a successful international manager. Excuse me, whether you're geocentric, ethnocentric, or polycentric. Ethnocentric managers tend to deal with what we know best, so we have that superiority, and they believe that their native country has the best language, culture, everything. And then you have the concept of, excuse me, polycentric is that they know best. It's more outward looking, and it's basically they understand the other native attitudes and their practices, and they go, well, we're here in their country, so they know best. And then you have the concept of geocentric, which is what's best is what's effective. So basically, it's more of a all-encompassing viewpoint. So make sure you know those, because that can affect your success rate with how you deal with an organization. If you have a country that you're dealing with that has a very strong sense of pride and are firmly entrenched in the belief that they have the best technology or the best practices in a certain area, and you come in trying to put your organization over top of theirs, they will naturally push back. And if you go in with the opposite standpoint, which is that, okay, we're here, we want to partner with you, and we know that you have the best situation in this, they might be better off, you might be better off dealing with them in the long run. Excuse me. How to expand internationally. You have on a spectrum on page 117, you have your low risk, low investment, starting with global outsourcing, moving on to import, export, and counter trading. Licensing and franchising is pretty much right in the middle. Joint ventures, and then wholly owned subsidiaries being on the high risk end of the spectrum there. I would take a look at that just to know, so that you know the terminology and have an understanding about if you do work for a multinational corporation or whatever the case may be, and you hear them talking about strategies for growth, then you'll have a little bit more understanding of what they're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about offshore work, outsourcing. So we've taken some jobs and moved them to China, India, all types of information, a lot of technology jobs, some engineering jobs, and whatever the case may be. So there's the concept of offshore, which is totally taking a group of people who used to do a job and taking that job, not the people, and moving it to another country. You moved it offshore. Near shore might be closer by, so it might be in Mexico or something like that, but it might be in a different area, and it's a little bit closer by, or even it could be near shoring can be done conceptually within the country. So you have some companies that have said, well, we've noticed that X is a lower cost labor pool, so we're going to move that call center to, let's say, someplace in Utah or Montana or something like that, where we can get a little bit lower costs associated with that business function. So there's pros and cons to these solutions. Some people do very well in that. Some companies do very well in that framework. Others have found that there's a little bit of pushback stateside for folks dealing with folks who are outside of the country. There's people who now give you the option. Are you okay with speaking with an operator in New Delhi or Juarez versus somebody who is sitting in, someplace in North Carolina. So they'll give you those choices, but there are definitely pros and cons to that. You'll also find that if a company gets too much of a pushback, they get too many complaints, whether it's language or culture or whatever the case may be, they might reshore jobs. And some companies have started to do that. Say, all of our call centers are going to be stateside once again. And they realize that once they get done with, having to troubleshoot too many problems or too many complaints or across the board or whatever the case may be, they make the decision that they're going to reshore jobs. So it just depends. All of these things very much pendulum. They'll go one direction for a while, and then that gets a little bit out of joint, and then they'll move back a little bit the other direction, and then usually the solution is someplace in the middle. The concept of barriers to trade, the tariffs are spoken about here, quotas, embargoes, and sanctions. All good stuff to know. Helps you absolutely listen to the business section of the news a little bit better. So just know that they are classified as your barriers to trade. And they don't always work the way that people think that they do. So you might put a tariff on what you think is going to be a country, and then next thing you know, everything in the U.S. winds up costing a lot more. So sometimes they're highly political and not necessarily the best practice. Organizations promoting international trade, so you've probably heard these names, not recognizing what they were. You have your World Trade Organization, which is designed to monitor and enforce trade agreements. You have your World Bank, which is to provide low-interest loans to developing nations for basically infrastructure improvement, and your International Monetary Fund, which is designed to assist in smoothing the flow of money between countries. All good stuff to know, like I said, to help you understand a little bit more of the world news. But know the differences there when you hear that. Makes you seem like you know what you're talking about. A couple of other major trading blocks. You have NAFTA, which is the North America Free Trade Agreement, which is basically Mexico, USA, and Canada. Some people love it, some people hate it. It just depends on, I guess, which side of the coin you're on. Some people think it was a job killer. Other people got jobs out of it, so go figure. The EU is basically 28 or so countries in Europe, which basically is set up as a trading bloc. Of course, we know that Britain has opted out, and basically in 2006 they decided to leave the EU. So they are in the process of doing all kinds of work to separate their funds and their money and their trading. So it's interesting stuff to read about, and there's always new ones too. So like here we have one, the TPP, that was a hot one, February 2016. Interesting stuff to hear about. And then you have your favorite nation status. So I did give you a little bit of a reading assignment on that. And basically that's, it's a condition basically, which countries grant each other's countries more favorable trading treatment with reduction of certain duties and taxes. So basically, who who people have trading agreements with. It's kind of interesting, and some people think it works, and some people think it doesn't. So we have added the S to BRICS. So it used to be BRIC, which was Brazil, Russia, China, and India, making up the, I don't want to say derogatory, but it's the second world economic movement. They've added to that South Africa recently, so now it's BRICS, but these are major players in economic marketplaces, and really have a lot of money moving around and a lot of development going on. Some of these countries are a little bit plagued by some government forces that sometimes are not optimal, which probably has something to do with tamping down some of their progress, and they have continuing challenges across the board. So they definitely see the impacts of those in terms of companies that definitely want to expand, looking at all the BRICS in terms of the next countries that they want to go into. So let's talk a little bit about cultural differences. This is always fascinating to me. I gave you that Globe article to read about the dimensions, the cultural dimensions, which is just fascinating. But it's very important to know cultural differences when you're dealing with people who are from other nations. So you have to know how to deal with things like gender egalitarianism, how they handle money and the concept of money, how they handle time, their regards to things like religion, physical space between you and the people that you're dealing with. You know, some people have a wide bubble around them, and other people you get right in their face when you're dealing with them. All of these types of things. Concept of dealing with the future. You have a country that you know doesn't have any kind of, what do they call it, future orientation. You know, you might have limited success in getting people to buy long-term life insurance, or you might have limited success in getting people to invest in financial instruments that you know, have future reward and not necessarily now. Very, very important stuff in terms of how to succeed. Companies that take this cultural impact and take it with proper regard, they do much better than those who say it's no big deal, because it is a big deal. You know, so it's something to think about. You might have a superstar salesperson who goes to one country and fails miserably because they have just not really concerned themselves with the cultural implications. Then you might have somebody who's, you know, a middle of the road performer, and they go in there and they have mastery of the human side of it, and they do quite well. So it kind of just depends on, you know, how people interpret and understand the cultural ramifications. So this, like I said, this is very important to know. One of the things that always cracks me up is the time orientation, because it is very much a consideration. You have some countries that are, you know, punctual. They say 9 o'clock, it's 9 o'clock. That's it. 9:01, you're late, and no slack. And then you have other countries where somewhere around 10 might be tomorrow. You know, it's you know, I'll be there in a little bit means a week. So, you know, can you imagine trying to conduct business? If you're a type A personality from New York City, it's probably not going to work real well for you. You might have to find somebody who's a little bit more laid back to take that part for you. So, you know, I mean, like I said, it's fascinating. People have made great livelihoods on understanding cultures and protocols, and it's very important. So one of the topics in the back here talks about, you know, why do they fail? Well, they fail because they just probably don't understand the skill set involved in having to understand the protocols and the cultures of a company. Yep, so that'll be it. Read that chapter. That's a good chapter. Help you understand a little bit more, especially if your organization is one that has designs on going global. Thanks so much. Good night.